Lindsay's
We're
throwing
back live
that word
again?
out like
Okay.
3 times tonight. That's like,
I like it, it's good work.
Okay, well, welcome back to work meeting. We will continue on with item, that one we were on.
We're on.
Two one.
2.1.
2.1, that's right, we're backwards.
Which,
Go on to police and then general fund.
So wait, I just wanna make sure, before we move on, was that was our conversation about stormwater?
correct.
I still am not quite sure, and maybe there isn't an answer to have, but I'm asking this question for the benefit of our residents is, was there an underestimation of what the costs would be for the capital improvement, was it, or are we pretty certain it was just a formal decision not to incorporate those estimated costs into the fee?
So portion in there is some money set aside every year for capital, about $100,000.
As we said, 100,000 a year.
One emergency repair on Midas Creek was
Yeah,
$395.
395.
So the 100,000, it's a number that was picked. It's probably low based on what we're seeing actual costs for those kinds of things. So I believe a number was picked, they put it in there. We just have to decide if, when we have those projects, if we should be, that's that policy question ultimately we'll have to decide. Should that be in this fund?
Okay.
And in the plan that was created, there was some money. There weren't, I didn't find a list of specific projects, but just some money set in there to deal with what would come up.
And there's a difference between those types of capital replacement projects versus these unfunded mandates that we have to have
Right.
a plan for. That's
Which
kind
are
of the-
now being planned.
It's kind of the difference that we wanna see, and my question is, basically, are we separating those problems? Right, is it two
Right.
different structural problems?
Because if we had set aside money for capital improvement projects, I don't know if we would have had on there emergency repairs for Midas Creek.
No, and there's a statement, in the response to your question, we talk about the need in that fund for a fund balance larger than others, simply
Right.
because of emergencies and those things, so that you could save it and deal with it there. This was started in 2019, so it's still a fairly young fund, and we're learning, as we've said, we're gonna switch it to an enterprise, or that's the impact fees. But this is the enterprise, so, when we come back to you and we have that policy discussion and what are the ramifications of that, decide. You can always pick, we're only gonna put this much in, and if it exceeds it, then you decide how to pay for it outside of the fund.
It's kind of set amount.
It's similar, I think at one point when we adopted impact fees, the council, back when, didn't adopt the 100% of the impact fees, they actually adopted less. So it's a policy decision that gets made a lot. It just sometimes it's good to look at that regularly so that you don't get upside down.
One other question, this kind of applies across the board, but my notes have it affiliated with the stormwater, is that one of the corrective measures that was recommended in the memo that you had sent out talked about analyzing our utility rates more frequently. And I think that's an appropriate thing. But as part of that, are we analyzing also what our costs are, the personnel we have, what our priorities are, how we're analyzing these things, are we being efficient, what assumptions do we have that are underlying all these things, how are we updating our fees, all that kind of stuff. I guess I would just say this in general for any of the discussions that we make. I'm uncomfortable using the taxpayer's pocketbook as the backstop for anything. If we are going to increase a fee, if we are going to increase a tax, and it is for legitimate, well-researched, documented, understood reasons that don't have alternatives, that's one thing. If we're just saying, we're short, we're gonna raise the funds, I don't think that's an appropriate procedure for us to go about raising fees. I think if we're going to raise a fee, if we're going to raise a tax, it needs to be something that's thoroughly vetted, where we have gone through all of these aspects of what
Comprehensive
we're doing, all of our assumptions, our processes, our people, all, top to bottom, before we move forward with a fee increase
Right.
on the back of taxpayers.
But I think that was part of the reasoning behind that, a little bit of the shortfall on the stormwater, is it's because it was, first of all, new. And then we're trying to look into it, what mandates do we have to have, what things do we have to cover, so we were going through the process of, we're gonna have to have these people staffing it, we're gonna have to have this equipment to do it.
Right.
All the things that were necessary at the time, without coming in and saying, oh, we gotta charge you $50 a month now on this kind of thing. So it was probably more minimal structured, just simply so that we could get to the point where exactly what you're talking about, that, because again, like I said in the previous, that we don't know when these mandates are ever gonna get put into effect, and it seemed irresponsible or laying cost at their feet or on their backs before we really understood exactly what those would be. So definitely that needs to be analyzed, reassessed and looked at, so we make the adjustments needed for it. But that, it was, Blake was going through that, when he pulled up this old spreadsheet, I was like, oh yeah, I had to go back, circle back around and remember some of the discussions in the meetings, and those were types of discussions that we had.
Right, because, okay, I'm just gonna say it. Some entities that, get taxes through property taxes, have implemented tax increases for things that are good intentioned, want, wish, hope things with no documentation, no research, no evidence to suggest that the things they're asking to pay for actually would accomplish any of the things that they say it's going to accomplish.
Okay.
And I think that is an inappropriate way to justify taking millions of dollars out of taxpayers' pockets.
Like I said, if the money's there, it gets spent.
Yeah.
Right.
And then a need arises, now we
Exactly.
need inflation.
And now it's, we can never cut that program again, because now it's a have to thing, so. I use that as a point of contrast in what I think our process should be, is not that.
Yeah.
We should have reasons for the things we're doing, why we're doing it. I think we owe that a level of accountability to the residents of town, so.
I agree.
So I think part of that, what I wanna see with each of these, and this isn't just stormwater for all of them, is a comprehensive plan.
Right.
Detailing out those things. So if we have a fee, and part of that fee, what's contemplated in that fee is the servicing the system, that includes the people. So what's the metric that's being used? How many people do we really need? What's the job being done? And so and then it's always, well, growth. And this is I hope I articulate this properly, right? Because it's always, well, growth, it's been this nebulous thing in the future, growth is gonna solve all our problems, there'll just be more money in the future. Well, we kinda know where that border is now, it's not this unknown thing out there. We know what it is. You can calculate the number of units, you can calculate the average property tax, you can calculate the average fee per connection. Like, we know what the end game pretty much is. And then you need to, in that comprehensive plan, show me how we're, like, the workload for servicing that system. So for stormwater, we have this many connections now and this many employees. Does that mean that you just take that number and forward it out to that many connections, you need that many employees, and does the fee cover that? Or are there economies of scale that we need this many base employees for, just to run the basic system, and then it's really only half as many, to do the basic service work, right? So whether it's
That's exactly
stormwater,
my
whether it's
point.
water, whether it's parks, whatever it is, like we should know what that is. And then the cost of those people, what I said earlier about having money and then we spend it, like that's what happens. Well, we have money there, so let's add someone. Because we have that money there this year, but that's not really what that money was planned for. That money was planned to put aside to pay for capital replacement, right? That money should have put some aside to plan on wage increases over the next 3 years before we do another rate increase. Right, that's what I mean by comprehensive plan, rather than just we have money this year, let's spend it. And then we'll go ask for more, because inflation happened, right?
So stuff like that's coming, like you were talking to, like every allocation now is gonna come back to us now.
Your allocation and one of the responses here, we met,
And my apologies, I only got a chance to
Yeah.
review it, and some of it is, I appreciate the written and I'll go back and read it, but I also think it's important to have these questions in the public.
and that's fine,
context,
so we wanna put
right
this
now.
down so you could take it back and think about it. So we met today, Kyle, I and Trevor Ram, who's our new analyst, to talk about the 10-year model. Ultimately, what we want is one that's dynamic, so we could sit in here and say, what if we added an employee there? We could do it on the fly and show you how that impacts your fund balance. What those, again, it's based on assumptions, and so those, one of the things we're committed to do is as you do it over a few years, you go back and say, how close to reality are we projecting? And then you make refinements so that it becomes a tool that you can use to make those larger policy decisions. And I've used this since I started my career, because you make decisions that the federal government at one point had that COPS grants, and it was this wonderful thing that were gonna be free. But it was a diminishing grant, so the first year was 100%, then it was 75%, then 50%, and the fourth year, you covered 100%, you had to keep the officers. And so a lot of cities got themselves, and there was another round of 100% for 3 years, then it was all you, and you had to keep them the fourth year. A lot of cities got in serious trouble because, hey, this is gonna work. I took a position, when I took my position in Colorado, I went out to be sworn in about 2 weeks before I was to start, and it was a council meeting, and they were swearing in 2 new police officers, and the chief turned to me, the then chief, and said, I wanted to hire 2, but they said I didn't have enough money, so I waited halfway through the year and saved up so I could hire 2 people. And my first thought was, I've already given my notice. It's like saying, hey, I can't afford the house for the year, so if I wait 6 months, I can't make the house payment, but then I can make it for those 6 months, and then I'm in trouble. So we worked through that there, but that's the tool that helps a council. The idea is that it helps you understand what your impacts are, when you make a decision, one-time money, what does that look like? If it's an ongoing commitment, what does that really mean? And so right now, it's primarily, we're focused on the general fund, those funds that have people in them, but we would like to be able to use that same tool for some of the other funds, your impact fees. So when we say, hey, this is impact fee eligible, wonderful. Is there money actually available in there?
Cause we already know we're over tapped in it.
Yeah, it's the old days, so when you had a checkbook, it didn't matter if you had checks.
Right.
It mattered how much money was in the bank.
Nuh-uh.
The
It mattered if you had checks.
I think the complicated part of budgets in general, of any organization, is the people, right? The stuff is easier to calculate. Costs this much today, and it has this much life, and I can use that 10-year average inflation, right, for stuff. People is a lot tougher, because what ends up happening in every one of these, and it's kind of why I brought up the discussion we had with the fire budget, is there's money in the budget, so let's hire that person. And so I think that's what you're talking about, is we will have a tool to look at of, okay, we have that this year, but what does that do to next year's budget and the inflation factor the following year and the following year and the following year? It's not just this year's money. So it's not, do we have money to hire someone, it's, do we have both the revenue now and in the future to hire someone? And looking at the citywide in general, whether it's police or parks or roads or whatever, there has to be some metrics that we can look at that justify the workload. Like there's not just that we have enough money today to hire someone, so let's hire them, but is there enough work that we need to hire someone? So the stormwater thing, and the reason I bring up the stormwater, it was in your memo, that part of that's built in, that with growth, we'll need more people to service the system. Why? How? Like, what's the trigger that, okay, now we need someone else? What's the amount of work that's being done on how many connections? If it's an officer, how many calls, and not every call is the same, so how much committed time and severity and busy times of the day and all those sorts of things that go into especially shift work, right? There are some complex layers to it, but just having money this year to hire someone doesn't mean you need to
We
hire
can afford
someone.
to hire them.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you need to or can afford to hire someone.
Right.
Right, we need to have other metrics built into a comprehensive plan that say, this is when we need someone. So, sorry, I'm jumping ahead to police, but let's say stormwater. We have, our guys are running from call to call, or water, we're chasing leaks nonstop and we're behind. And the amount that we're behind is backing up, whatever you can quantify that and say, there's so much work now, we need another person to do that work or we're gonna be in serious trouble.
Yeah, and then not to belabor this too much, but the idea would be not only may you need a person, but you may need another truck. And then you have, or other additional equipment required to support that person in that job.
And so it's matching the need, right, the workload and the sustained revenue for it. So, and a lot of times with that, we're talking about growth. So it's not just, we expect to have this much more in population or this much more in property tax by this date, so let's hire someone. It's, okay, we anticipate having that growth in that revenue, but then we need a trigger with the service calls, right? We expect to have this much more work to do in the water system to then use that money.
I'm gonna use what you just said to
Right.
make a really important point, is that I think that the staffing decisions that we make have to be related to service levels, not revenue levels. Good or bad, right? That there
It has to be
are,
both,
well,
right? You have to-
it's constrained somewhat, maybe the timing of it, but you should make a decision, say, we need to hire somebody, not because we have the money to hire them, but because we have a need based on metrics. Then we have to
And
make a
there's the
decision
money.
about the finances, if we can actually do that. Yes, now we have a formal need, let's make sure we can find the money to do that, right?
It's like,
I think what happens is we say, oh, well, next year we're gonna have $150,000, we're just gonna hire somebody now and get ahead of things and da-da-da, and that, I don't think, I wanna restate it again, I think that staffing decisions have to be metrically driven by need, not by revenue. Revenue
Not
comes
by
after
not by a
making
budget
decisions.
balance in a
Right,
discrete.
Right, it has to be, the budgetary numbers would flow after the need decision is made.
I know, and we might be doing that,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the department heads are probably pretty good at doing that. But, I was talking to Blake about it a little bit, I was just comparing it to our traffic studies, right? We know our roads, we want to maintain a D level, right? We don't want it would be a lot of them are operating at an A level, right? But we don't want them to get below a D level of service, right? And when they get to an F, then it might kick into, well, when it gets to an F, these are the things that we need to do to bring it back up to a D level. And the same with hiring, right? We operate here, we want to, it'd be nice if we could always operate in an A, but it's not realistic with budget. So we want to make sure that here, it's kind of the same thing, right? And we do traffic studies and analysis that tell us, once you hit this many, traffic
Cars
counts,
per day, yeah.
it's gonna, and the same with hiring, but I would assume that I think probably your directors and your managers of that department have been given that directive already, but it'd be nice to have a little bit more clarity.
Yeah.
And we can
That's what I'm
give
saying,
you
if
that
you're-
information, so you can see, here's why we're that's what
Yeah.
I think I
Yeah,
started out, with. Here's why we're
It's just-
recommending this, is because here's your level of service. Cause council can always say, yeah, that level of service C you're shooting for is great, but we're okay with D.
We have to have D because our budget only allows for D.
Right.
Yeah,
Can
it's
I-
the same with our roads, I think we'd probably have rather have bees, but our budget doesn't
And,
allow.
and let me say that I don't make the statement or ask the question because I'm suggesting that we're doing something different than that.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it as an accusatory thing or
Yeah.
suggesting that staff is failing or being willy-nilly with taxpayer money. I only say it from the standpoint of, it's important for residents and taxpayers to hear, that's the kind of level of scrutiny that we're making, and so being able to bring those kind of numbers to, you know, especially if we're talking about allocations, hey, here's the levels of service we have, here's the calls we're getting, here's blah, 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 we need to hire somebody. Great, we have full justification, we know what we need to do with the budget, let's hire that person.
Can I also say?
And it
about-
justifies it to everybody.
The opposite is also true, right? As the city continues to grow and change and our workforce changes, we have different needs in different areas, and we can't always just hire somebody. So when we
Right.
have the attrition, someone quits or goes away, we look at that and say, do we really need that person in that position, or do we need them over here?
Exactly where I was gonna go, cause it crosses over
Yeah.
departments, right?
Yes,
That's true.
It's
Thank
not just,
Yeah,
it's not
In a
just
silo.
hiring, it's
Yeah.
reallocating,
Yeah.
and
and
we've
you
done
see
some
like,
of that the last year.
like the building department slowing down or something, and it's like, oh, can we repurpose these kinds of things, or, and as,
For events,
as,
or-
yeah, as growth continues to shrink a little bit, then you'll see needs for shifting.
Yeah, or you get a system that creates substantial efficiencies and you
Yeah.
need the less, one person less or something.
A
Really, I
built out
wonder-
city is different than a rapidly growing
Yeah.
city.
Right.
For
So
sure.
you have to be prepared.
if you're building a budgetary tool to show us if you hire someone, this is the effect on multiple
Can hurry
budgets. To me, there needs to be that need metric in it, not just is there money this year and then you'd need this much money in years to come, but there's that. We're charging this $7 fee anticipating that with more and more connections or more and more detention basins, we're gonna need to service them. What, connect the two dots for me, we're gonna have this much revenue from it, and this is the anticipated service need. Here's the trigger when we would need to hire someone and deploy those funds, because what happens is, as you're incrementally adding those, say, detention basins or connections, whatever it is, you're collecting that fee incrementally, and you have that money, and it's getting spent every year most of the time. You're not building a balance to then deploy to pay for that person years from now and pays for them for a good amount of time, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, that's what I think is missing a lot of time, and I don't know if it's missing here or not, but what's missing a lot of times in a lot of organizations, if you have a consultant come in and look at this, this is what they're gonna do, right, and drill down to each position and each, like, what are your hiring practices, how do you go about it, how do you account for it? Because government's the only place, again, where if you make a mistake in hiring, you don't fix it. Right? If if anywhere else you make a mistake, you hire too many people, or you you don't have enough revenue to pay people, you just get rid of people. Like that's what you do, that's the fix, and we don't do that in government. We need, one, cause we have a more sustainable source of revenue, but we can't get out over our skis in the fashion I just described, right? You can't be using that incremental revenue for expenses now when it's really meant for that new person when we hit that need trigger.
One thing I will say to that, cause I agree in general, exactly with what you said, is that our revenues are not necessarily tied to the demands that are placed upon the city. And so it's balancing level of service with resource. And, which is what I think you're saying, so we're trying to do that, but we do have to understand that maybe our revenue's here, but all of a sudden, things start to change and our demands start to go up. I think we had this conversation with people, we're a growing city, we should have a lot more money. But every new rooftop creates some level of demand. And so that rapidly growing means your demands for services are also growing. Every time you add a park, there's only so many parks employees, right? You
Yeah.
need to add new employees.
So for
to
example,
maintain-
I had a conversation with Chief earlier today, we were talking about if you have suddenly, you know, you reach a certain population, it's not just one more officer, it's one more officer on every shift. So now you need 3 more officers to actually complete that duty, right? So
And you probably have to hire 5 or 6 to be able to
to keep those
consistently
3 on,
have
yeah,
3
that's
on
what I
every
mean,
shift.
is that we have to have better accountability around these things, and I think you guys understand that.
And we've talked about triggers and metrics to recognize, so we're gonna talk police. We talk police, we need to establish several different triggers and be watching those, cause things can turn pretty quickly. And, it's, if your resources allow it, when you see it start to change, it's better to make, have some early triggers you can make it, instead of getting to the spot where you're just behind. Because once you're behind, you will always be
Yeah.
behind.
Way more expensive to hire enough people to catch up.
Well, there really is no catch up, and
Yeah,
if I may, law enforcement is as binary as water with pipes and when I need to know a meter and what that lifespan is. For instance, today we picked up a bag of syringes and some spoons and cottons over at Lee's Market. Now, I can't imagine anybody sitting in this room ever thought Harriman we would be walking around picking up syringes and stuff. But I have said for some time now that area down there is compressing on it. And it will continue to do that. And to Nathan's point, in law enforcement, when you get to our metrics, and we watch metrics every day. Nathan and I go through metrics every single day. And I've told you all about the 60-60-60, right? It's one of the finest metrics we have, because per 1,000 population is not great, right? It doesn't tell you what your problems are. What we watch does tell us what the problems are. And largely what we're seeing is if you get to, let's say one of the metrics is 60%, but if we get to that 60%, you're already now behind, and we're racing over the course of a year to get a officer hired. In 2020, things changed, right? And we now are paying our officers from the day we started, Jared, you'll remember, excuse me, $10 more an hour to keep cops working, and we're not the highest paid, right? On a scale, we're 11 out of 13, but we know we're competitive in the 50 percentile. Now, all of that being said, law enforcement's just a tricky beast, and the day you're behind, you don't catch up. And I can give you, without naming cities in this valley, really, really good examples of what that's like for quality of life after that happens, right? So as we watch these metrics, and we've talked about it, the trigger points really have to be before what we want to accomplish happens,
Right, well-
right? Because then we're in trouble. And then we're not talking $400,000, we're talking millions of dollars to get caught up.
But see, that's part of the concern and the discussion we have to have is that I feel very confident you have pretty outstanding metrics about everything that's going on at the department, calls times, response time. I mean, you've got a lot of information. And if your forecast is that you need 2 more bodies in next year's budget in order to maintain levels of service and not degrade metrics in meaningful ways that would put us in the behind status, then our issue isn't just, is the general fund supplementing, is blah, blah, blah. There's more material imbalances than just something we can cover up with subsidizing a police budget. Right now, we have to figure out how you're not only gonna do that, how you're gonna cover 40% inflation over 3 years, how you're gonna cover new bodies and all that stuff. So, do you understand what I'm saying is that, we're not just solving a budget problem, we're also having to understand a public safety service level problem as well as how that fits into the budget, right? And it's more complex in certain things, cause I would say that, water and public safety are right at the top of the list. I don't think, stormwater, people would worry if it floods, it becomes a more issue, but they're like, okay, we can hold off on some stormwater connections. You can't hold off on clean water getting it out of the tap, right? You don't wanna hold off on, hey, there's, a violent crime happening. Okay, we'll be there in a couple hours. That's, just not gonna be acceptable. So,
So where we stand currently in 2024, again, some of these metrics, we met yesterday and talked about, we have a plan, and right now it's tied to years, but it probably needs to be tied more to those metrics, with a process where we're watching. That's why I said we haven't developed them yet, but we were talking about, well, what is that, if you're at 60, what is this magic percent where we say, okay, we've now hit this consistently, we're gonna ask for more people, because we know by the time we do this, we'll get them in time to keep us at a certain level, because we're really at more peaking
So
staffing right now?
we have met our basics, which, I don't wanna make this meeting much longer than it has to be, but I will, because I like to talk, right, Wendy? We have.
Or women and children will die.
You're right. Well, yeah, that's probably true. Not here, not with a harem of police department, everybody, we're
Just
fine.
women and children.
So we run a shift of 5 people, a sergeant and 4 officers, right? We know that if we do the math on all of their leave and benefited time off, or what we call duty loss, which also includes, light duty and other things that impact this training. We know if we do the math on that, that we have enough people on each shift to get 3.75 people working every day. Our minimum is 3. So think about that for a minute. We cover 23 square miles-ish. I was told I was wrong at 25.
23.2.
23.2, perfect. We covered that mass and 70,000 people with a minimum of 3 people on shift to respond to an emergency. Okay, that's a lot. And our guys do a really good job of it. In fact, our priority 1 times are less than our neighbors, by 30 or 40 seconds, which matters, right? At the end of the day, that matters. We've got a very good dispatch system that gets us there quick, and we're using other stuff that helps us get there quick or know where we need to be before we need to be there in some of the dispatching program setups, right? So we know that we have to have 5 people on a shift. Counselor Shields asked me earlier, well, what if we did not have the $400,000 and we had to take that out of the police department, $800,000? We would equate that to about 5 officers. So that would take an officer off of each shift and a detective out of the detective division. Now, for all the math I just gave you, we're not gonna meet our minimum demands that day. That would put us at 2 on duty at any time, and it's just simply unsafe to do that. You can't not have officers out there with two guys covering the city.
So we have some interesting, we went from Bullfrog to D-Bats. It's about 20 minutes.
It's longer than.
And that's
That's
on
on
Mountain View,
traffic.
so it's a little bit faster. We think from like if you had an officer up in the Cove and they had to get to, where was it?
Mine Street.
Copper
Copper
Creek. That's, depending on time of day, that can take a while. So the way they have it, but we don't have to get into it.
But I think it is important to
Yeah,
talk about.
the minimum
beats, right?
staffing and the four beats, I think makes a lot of sense for this size. I don't know, so my recommendation in the memo I sent you was, I think you can hold off on the officers that were planned in 24. I do think there's a valid argument to be made that we should pull or at least provide the funding for the crossing guards. Right? I talked about this general fund subsidy. I would pick something discrete, and that's one that they've been funding that I think the schools should fund, but since they're not going to, we can shift that to the general fund. And then I think we need to adjust for some inflationary loss. We've lost cumulatively from the day we started. We look at how much our buying power is down. It's about one of the 7.5 time value money, Kyle's thing here. And again, we went through some hyperinflation last year, which is not normal. But since from the time we started.
Police inflation has even been greater.
Correct. I mean, we've lost about 1.6 in our
Different
buying power.
Inflation and market, labor market.
Correct, right, so the inflation number, we're seeing this, but within the Salt Lake Valley, law enforcement's costs have outpaced even that inflationary number. Which is pretty significant when because it is such a large cost. When we showed you that graph and you have police is by far the largest, then fire, then parks, and then streets, and then you drop way down. So again, that's my recommendation is that I don't likely just say, hey, just raise some money to cover it. I have not been able to find what analysis was done when it came in. I've read the minutes from the meeting. They said, hey, this is the rate we're gonna charge. I don't know what information was provided to council as to what that staffing or budget was gonna look like. My understanding is that chief wasn't even really asked what it was gonna look like. We went through a really quick turnaround. So it's hard for me to say, well, how did we grow this way? I don't know what the I don't know what the baseline was supposed to be. But given our size and demographic, I think we're probably there. We did add a detective last year into the force because we're seeing. We have a metric for patrol, that's the one we talk about, 60, 60, 60 a lot. But your investigations, it's different levels of metrics and they were just slammed. Our civilian staff down there, did you tell me 100 plus grandma requests a month is what we've been averaging?
Yeah. And that was like 100% Cody's over record, so I probably
It was
turned around, but-
100% increase from the year prior, which is why we came to and requested the allocation last year for the.
We don't know
record
why
setting.
that happened, but it's continued at
I
that
was
rate.
gonna say, was that
So,
an anomaly or?
No, it's
or we-
continued.
No, it's continued to grow as.
Sign of the times.
Yeah,
Public,
Are you seeing the
public
same
access
thing, Jackie?
information.
So some of it is I believe, it's just me, but it's the types of crime that we deal with out here.
well, and to your point, Nathan, that's exactly right. We don't know when all of a sudden something's gonna spike in law enforcement, cause it isn't as simple as a lifespan on a water meter. And for whatever reason that happened, I truly believe it's tied to the more violent crimes we're seeing in domestic violence. Because people are wanting that for services, and so they're coming in and getting their paperwork, and that spiked dramatically for us, right? When we, and to the point we had to add people.
People were stuck at home together.
You know, and I wanna caution that we really are at a point where we need to address peak times. I'm with Nathan, I think we could hold that a year. What I also don't wanna do, Wendy and I talk about this a lot, is tip general fund over by saying, oh, you know, police, women and children are gonna die, and take that, but at the same time, I don't ever want my officers to be in an unsafe position. That's, if there's something critical in the city, that's one of them, right? I don't want your guys going into a water house with fluoride spilled and not having the right equipment. So I don't wanna upset all of that balance that we have, but at the same time, those are things we need to look at.
And it's
Sorry about
important,
the
it's
fluoride.
important to bring that on. It's important to recognize the different metrics too, because, for example, in our SRO unit, under our contract that we have with Jordan School District, if they open a middle school tomorrow, even if that school requires zero service from us, we have the staff and officer there, and we get zero property tax in return.
So there's
There's a little bit of
whole nother
reimbursement
conversation we
associated
need to have about schools and
Yep.
whatever contract we have, cause that has to be addressed. We have a disproportionate number of schools on our side of the border versus our neighbors. And that we have to fund that to basically provide a service for their residents is crazy to me.
So a couple things to think about, counselor, and you and I have talked a lot about this, is as they open those schools, we know that kids come from other areas of the city. When they come to the schools, they report crimes, and our officers get involved in those. Now, yes, they may have happened somewhere else, and we'll get it back to that agency, but those are hours out of our patrol days trying to figure that out. And when I say kids coming from other cities, I'm talking thousands of kids coming from other cities that have contact with our SROs.
I'm gonna just give you
And-
one thing to think about numbers. What's South Jordan's population? I don't wanna pick on South Jordan. I'm gonna-
85.
This is a
82 to
beef,
85,
this is a
something
beef I have with Jordan School District, right? So they're saying they're pushing 100,000 or 65. How many high schools do we have?
4.
How many do they have?
Jordan? Three. They have Valley, Paradigm, and Bingham.
Right, so we have two 6A, right, largest size public school.
With the
public high
largest
schools,
footprints in the state of Utah.
Right, largest footprints in the state of Utah, and they're both on the boards of Harriman, at least 50% of their population comes from outside of Harriman, right? I mean, a lot of these schools are on the border, but they're on our side of the border, so we foot the bill for most of it.
But that matters when it comes to traffic cars, we have a traffic unit that
That's what I was
spends a
gonna
lot of
say,
time
it's
when
not
we're
just
doing
the
crashes,
schools.
because kids run into each other,
Yeah, so
but
if
they're
you,
not our kids.
if you break down, tell me if I'm off base, but if you break down the types of calls, right? So you have, the thing that people care about I will say the most is emergencies, right? Life and death
Mhm.
emergencies, the technical classifications of
Priority one,
these,
priority
right?
one.
So your priority one call, like everybody, it doesn't matter where it is, you're gonna respond, right?
That's right.
It's on their side or on our side sort of thing. But then it's, if you look at the numbers, like how many of our calls are those versus fender benders, right? So you talk peak times, a lot of traffic calls, right? I imagine that a lot of the domestic violence happens at somewhat predictable times of
Usually
day
through
when
evenings and weekends, yeah.
when people are at home and
Long weekend.
and together,
Yeah.
right? So there's some of those things that like you said, you can plan for them, peak times, et cetera, but some of the things that we can control, like a contract with the school district that has put double the amount of schools on our side of the border, we have half the population of the neighboring town like that. And that's just not just the SROs, it's the crossing guards and the traffic. All of, like, it's a compounding effect that we're paying for.
So you're talking, when the flex school opens, we'll have 18 schools in the city of Herman. 18.
Well,
We-
it's not
we
even
have-
just 18, you've listed Valley, how many kids go to Valley? In the other.
South Jordan.
In South Jordan?
That's why I said, just compare,
Couple
just
hundred?
compare the,
Compare numbers, even,
Oh,
it's
not
not even
even
just the
close
city,
to ours.
it's not even just
How
the
many
number of
students
schools,
we have
it's
in our
times
city,
how
yeah.
many students are
It's not
actually.
even close. I wanna say that there's about 20,000 students in Harriman City. It's for sure 17, cause that was the last count, but I think
But all
we're
those
probably
things
closer.
impact our service level and our ability to provide
yeah.
good service with zero offsetting revenue
Yeah,
into the,
for sure.
into the
So,
taxing district.
We
So-
do 450 crossings, it might be 500 by now, we do 450 crossings per week. We don't count it by employees, but we do have 50-something crossing guards, we spend $300,000-ish doing that. And that number's not gonna go the other way, and you know that I took a pretty public beating over trying to pull that back into a box over the last couple of years, knowing that it's gonna increase again. And it's headed back up, Blake. When we open this flex school, it's gonna be crossing guards. Oak, every time we build more houses out by Oak Leaf,
Yes.
there's more crossing guards, right? And it's a lot,
And again, right now, that law puts all that onus
right on us.
on us, and so, I will say for the school district with the SRO, we did negotiate with all the other cities an increase to our SRO. It was about, not quite 50%, we went from 45 to 65,
But it was a huge.
with an increase every year, so we will get more money.
And the three cities out here really ran with that.
Look, I
and-
don't wanna be overly dogmatic about this point, but we keep using this phraseology that I think is misleading, and it's this idea of, well, that we have to pay for it. It's not us, it is the residents of the city of Harriman that have to pay for this, it is taxpayers.
that's what I mean when I
All
say
we are is
yeah.
just a method of flowing the money out of their pockets to whatever needs to be paid. And
I live
it's-
in Harriman, so I'm.
Right, and if we,
so I'm talking about
if we push
the
back
ones
and
that
say, hey, we're not gonna pay for crossing guards, the school district is. Well, the school district is gonna raise taxes to pay for it, and that's still coming out of Harriman taxpayers' pockets.
They're
It's
good at
just,
doing that, by the way.
The only
It's
difference
not-
is,
Yeah.
when you have the schools on the boundaries, it's not just your city paying for the whole cost of those students.
I totally understand, right? If the school district paying for it would probably be the appropriate place for those funds to come from.
Counselor Shields, if I might, you asked me a question earlier today that probably would be a good public piece, and that's the design of the taxing district is, it's a little bit more complex than I think people think. There are people that don't pay into that, there's properties that don't pay into that, right?
Correct.
There's schools and churches and the liquor store, and all of those things take services from the police that aren't being funded by the people who are paying into it, and we also talked about probably the people paying the most taxes into the district are probably the people using the police the least. And
So sorry, I
Most of the
apologize
food
for kind of derailing where you were going, but just to finish a couple of points on that is one, I think we need to look at those things more closely and talk with our neighbors about that, cause it is disproportionate, and when I say we, it is the taxpayers. But it is different if you're a taxpayer on the Harriman side of the line or on the South Jordan side of the line. You pay the same school district tax, but we'll end up paying a higher public safety tax to pay for their school kids, right, use of our police services, and that's the disparity that I think we need to address, and that's over time, that's not gonna be necessarily in this budget. But where I wanna segue with it is, to that point, that Mountain Ridge area, I made this point going back to when that decision was made, we have the schools there instead of commercial, right? Where's the commercial? On Riverton's side of the line. So not only do we get this disproportionate cost to us, but they get a disproportionate benefit.
the good news is the kids go to eat there and in Riverton, but they crash in Harriman.
Which is kind of, and where I'm going with this is if you look at the
It might
chart
make
that
it
you gave us in here comparing to other cities, who I believe us in Riverton are the only ones that have a dedicated tax to the police department. Everywhere else, it's just the city tax, right? And then goes to the general fund and here's the budget for police and fire and everything else. And if you look at those, I think it'd be interesting to look at several of those and see how they break down the actual sources, right? Most of them, the property tax, probably 90% of it goes to public safety, and then they still supplement a good amount of it with sales tax, right, from general fund, and that's something that I think we need to keep in mind as we build a service model out. If we're talking about the metrics and things, can't be, I don't think it'd be based just on property tax, because it's not an accurate method of paying for a service across everything. But previous decisions have kind of boxed us in with limited sales tax opportunities, right? And when I say sales tax, it's not just commercial sales tax, but it is the property tax that those, say Bullfrog pays to the police department that they don't use the services. Like, we need that balanced land use.
I wish that were true. But, and that goes.
It's probably less than a school.
I think their CDA diminished our income a little bit.
Well, I just wanna bring that point up, that when you say we want the police department to stand on its own, it's easy to say that now, but as we look at a growth model and level of service, I think we kinda have to take that into account. So if that means that, like you said, some of the school type stuff maybe shouldn't be coming directly from their budget, maybe that's something we have to look at from the city point
Well,
of view. And
It's again, it's a little bit of a shell game, but I think it would be more appropriate to classify those expenses instead of saying, we're just giving a subsidy to the police department. It's, we're gonna partially subsidize the police department for normal operations. These other things that we're subsidizing now are gonna be regularly general fund obligations, i.e. crossing guards, maybe portion of the SROs or something, right, where it's still the same money,
Services, community services.
but it's
Yeah.
being,
Those are allocated.
but it's being allocated more appropriately and transparently for the public's
And they
consumption.
can be built into a comprehensive plan of our growth model for
Right.
those revenue sources, right?
Right.
Rather than, what do we have money for this year, let's transfer some sort of thing.
Right.
Does that make sense? I hope I didn't, I know I took it way off where you wanted it to be.
So the only, so as we talked, there's not really a time frame other than if you want to do a truth in taxation. HCSEA is property tax, you would have to do that. Again, with inflation, because you have had that inflation loss, if you're trying to bring yourself flat, we ran these numbers today. It runs, if it's just covering the $400,000 short, if you push the hiring out, just covering that shortfall this year, it's about 5%. If you want to cover, that plus the hiring, it's about 10.5. My recommendation was 6.5, cause it gives you a little bit of time to
But
figure
that-
out
Here's the thing,
what you want to do.
percentages are meaningless to me.
Do you want
It's
some numbers?
$33.
I'd like to know,
$33.
on an average home in Harriman, what is the tax increase that we're talking about
I'm
on
the
an
opposite,
annual
I
basis?
hate that one.
The-
Before you go there, I wanna know numbers, right? So what's the shortfall? Where are the numbers coming from, for one? Right? So we miscounted people or didn't budget properly, give me what that number
So-
is. Give
so-
me what the actual inflation number is that we're looking at. Give me what, if we don't hire this many people, what's that number to offset the other numbers? So there's a $400,000 shortfall. Give
What's
me
the
math-
composition
Give
of
me the
that?
math of how you arrived at that.
Okay. So if we just start there, that is it 396?
396, but.
396, to get to that level, you have not hired the 3 that are in the budget, right? So take those out. We don't fill the mental health position, and you get to which has been vacant for a while. We don't have, that's where you get to 396.
So
How we
not
got-
hiring 3 people that we
If
should,
you hire
4
them-
people that we should be hiring, we're still 400,000. If you
Correct,
hire
you're
those
gonna
4 people, you're
you're gonna be
a
that
million.
8.5, that 875 that you saw.
Well,
So
but-
how did you get there?
What-
It's because you were making decisions thinking our revenue, we all sat in here a few years, 2 years ago when we gave the raise partway through, said you have about $360,000 of cushion. Council chose to spend 270. I don't think, there was never the I don't know where the 360 number came from other than it was said. So again, to have your base model, I think we just adopted Slavisa's number. And UPD at that time was funding, they were supposed to have 18 officers in this area.
18.5 is
In the-
what we were funded.
physically here, but they're, you know,
Well,
they're
that's,
wizards.
that's
Well,
what they
and I-
told,
and-
that's what they told us that we
Yeah.
had, and we were lucky if there were two in the vicinity.
I can tell you there were nights I worked Harriman alone.
So, but they were building, so in theory, they built their, this is not true, but they should have had, that tax rate was based on 18.5 officers.
Now, when we separate.
Well, so what you're saying is Harriman can be patrolled by one person.
Yeah, I wasn't very good at it, counselor.
So,
It was hard.
I'm gonna restate two things.
Okay, so
One,
two
I-
people.
I wanna know the actual numbers, give me all the math, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but give me all the math of what you added up to where it's minus 396. Here's all our revenue that we're working with, here's all the expenses, here's where the shortfall is. And then here's the things that we changed, right? So if the shortfall was 800, then here's the things that we're taking out, which I think is what you're describing, to get it down to 396, right? So then the question for us is, well, how do you want to address that? Do you want to still transfer some from general fund for this year and build a plan with the metrics that we're talking about, et cetera, that we know we have a comprehensive plan on how and when we're gonna hire people? Or do we want to give this tax increase to fill that hole and then figure that part out? That's what it sounds like.
So again, I made you a recommendation what I think is best with all the different funds, because of the demands on the general fund. You can accept all the shortfall into the general fund. That's an okay
And
public
it's fine, and we can
policy.
afford it, it just means anything on your CIP is getting kicked off
Correct.
farther and farther along, it's just delayed.
And
I don't
so.
think any of us wanna advocate for this,
So if
Yeah.
if you take the,
but we haven't,
if we look at where the, crossing guards are, that's 310,000, right around that amount. Then your shortfall is, this shortfall's also skewed a
80,000.
bit because of the vehicles. We moved vehicles into 23 that we bought in this year that should have been purchased. So this is 1 year where we're a little, we're shy, which is why my recommendation is 6.5. You've got other expenses coming. We're going to push those vehicles longer, right? There's some metrics that go into added repairs versus cost, and with the vehicle costs going up, in the past, it made sense to turn them faster. We're probably gonna hold them longer now. So all those things are working in the background, but you still have
But-
a challenge structurally because
But Nathan, it's not fair for us to be talking about tax increases with all that information in the background. It has to be in the foreground. We have to bring that stuff forward, we have to account for it, we have to scrutinize it, and we need to make an accountability to the taxpayers about it. If we're saying we're gonna take 6% more taxes out of your pocketbook to cover expenses, I think we should have an accountability about what those expenses are, what actions have been taken to minimize the growth in expenses or adjustments in vehicle allocations and turn times. Maybe it's, I don't know, investments in technology that allow them to be more efficient, so you don't need as many officers. I'm just saying there has to be some kind of
so.
reconciliation about why we're making the decisions we are. And I feel like, I appreciate there's generalized numbers, it's 400,000, it's 100,000, it's this, but the reality is we're punting 4 people that, how does that impact level of service?
Well,
What does that mean? How close are we to hitting that tipping point where we're getting behind?
Well, and that's,
Can we afford to push people off for a year or 2 years? And then if we put it off, how many people are we gonna have to hire in 2 years?
that's the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, that's
the
what I'm saying,
questions I
we
want
can't-
answered, because if we're looking at just now and 6.5% basically gets us through this next year, and then we can try to figure the rest out. Well, that's just this year. You also in the memo said, well, we need to increase probably by 5% the next year and the 5% the year after that. Well, as a percentage, is why the percentage matters to me, is that's compounding on each other. We're not talking about 10, 6.5, we're not talking about 16.5, we're talking about 20% real effect on people's pocketbooks. And that's just on what's currently here, and we haven't done the hard work to build the comprehensive plan with the metrics that we just talked about that say when we'll need to actually add more people, that adds more burden to that. I don't wanna get into, cause really as I start to do that math, I'm like, this is unsustainable. It doesn't matter what, if you wanna maintain that level of service for the people that we have, I can't afford to live here if that's the case. There's no way, right? So I have a hard time going to the taxpayer and
understand
saying,
what you're
okay, we're gonna increase by 6.5%, and it's only $8 a month, right? That's how all these tax increases are, but I showed every one of those said the same thing, it's only $30 a year for the average average homeowner. We'll add those up by all of those, and we're talking serious money, from $3,000 to $7,200, right, from 2,000 in 12 years. That's over 8% per year compounding. Like, it's more than inflation, et cetera, and police is important. From the day one I say that law enforcement is the fabric of our community, right? If we get behind, we're in huge trouble. But we have to have the resources to pay for it. So before I can go to the taxpayers and say, I'm gonna increase your taxes, because it's easy one time to say, I'm gonna increase your taxes because we want to take care of our people and all the inflation and blah, blah, blah. But I can't go to them and say that every year. Right? So that works once, but it doesn't work the second and third time. And that's what I see on the horizon. That's kind of what is being said, is we need to do that at least 3 times, and hopefully we'll figure it out between now and then. So what I wanna see.
So I can defend myself on that, cause it
It's
makes it sound
okay.
like I'm not,
No. I get where you're coming from, but what I wanna,
it's based on a staffing model. And a level of service.
so this is where I'm
That
going.
may be where you have to decide, are you
yes.
willing to fund, what level of service are you?
So I think the conversation we need to have, and maybe we need to understand better, is what is the model you've been pursuing, and does that need to change? And if so, what is the right way for us to change it? What are those metrics? If we're looking at, so what you described helps me a lot. That makes a lot of sense. We need 5 people per shift to cover our area properly. I'll go back to what I said earlier of, we no longer have an undefined boundary where growth is gonna be exponential forever, right? We know what that boundary is, we know what it's gonna look like, we know what the numbers are, et cetera. So I don't know the answers to this, I'm just throwing it out. If I'm building a plan, I'm saying, okay, well, this is base level of service, we wanna have that, we have that now, the 5 per shift to cover the area. Then we need to break it down into all the things we were just talking about, the types of calls, the time of day that they're happening, right? And the level of service we wanna provide to those sorts of things. And then so it's not that we add so many people per population, like you said, we have the base level of coverage for the area and the services. So what are the metrics then that we need to look at to add people as we do add those people, and they're in those types of housing? I mean, it's condensed, and it's what I call it's the pressure cooker that I've described before, right? I think we need to have a serious conversation of what that looks like and what we really think that we can pay for. Because we talked the other day, but sorry, I digress a little bit, but I'm gonna give you another metaphor. When you get used to having something, you need it, and you can't do without it, right? So when you look at your household budget, and you're used to all these stupid apps that add up, and all of a sudden I'm paying $200 a month for HBO and Disney and whatever else, and we don't watch any of them, but then they sit down with me and I say, well, you need to save some money, and they say, well, I don't have any money to save, and I say, well, what about these things can you cut? And I'm like, oh no, I can't do without those things. our residents start to do the same thing. I expect somebody to show up within 10 minutes when I tell them that my car got broken into. When it got broken into last night, it's not going anywhere. No more damage is going to be done. Women and children aren't going to die. The detective can get to it, can schedule an appointment and get to it tomorrow, right? Or whatever that is. Like, we can look at things a little bit differently that way. So, here's what I'm saying is that it's what is the metric? If we're looking at covering an area and having a base level of service, are we there realistically, or are we not?
I'm gonna, just, let me interrupt for just a second, because I wanna be, let me be clear about something. I'm not disagreeing with you in terms of creating transparency and accountability around those metrics. However, I am absolutely certain that I am not qualified to make a determination about appropriate levels of service for the city. I can make a determination on how to fund the appropriate levels of service, but it's not, I can't do that. That's why we have a chief of police to
That's
do
what
those metrics and report to us what those numbers are.
So I just
What-
said is,
I know, but what,
we may probably need to understand that
right,
better.
and I think we do need to understand it better, and I think we need to report to the taxpayers better. But we have stated this, all of us, multiple times, that the police perform a function for us in terms of public safety that we are unable and not only unwilling, but unable to perform for ourselves. They do things for us we can't do for ourselves. Their training, their sophistication, their mindsets, their skills, their attitudes, their bravery, whatever you wanna call it, they can execute in ways that we can't.
100%.
And it's indispensable. And I, as much as we speak about the scrutiny of the budget, my concern is that budget discussions and our being critical of budgetary things, I don't want that to get twisted or translated into somehow being critical of our police. The
I hope that's-
men and
doesn't-
women,
I
no,
hope
no, no,
what I'm
and
saying doesn't
that's,
sound that
that's what I'm trying to be careful is the men and women on the front line, they need to know that we have their backs, that we are supporting them, that we want them to have the best reliable equipment, we want them to be safe, we want them to be mentally healthy, we want their families to be taken care of.
We wanna have the right number of people on the shift to
So
help.
to make sure that they're not spread too thin and they're put in dangerous situations, and all of that stuff, when we're asking for this, when we're scrutinizing, when we're asking challenging, difficult questions, when we're asking for reporting and accountability around these metrics, this is not a criticism, this is a justification for some of the things that we're being asked to do in terms of budgetary things.
We need to
have
make
the ability to
we need
say-
to make sure that what they're doing is sustainable, that we don't get into a spot where we're shortchanging.
Yeah, and there's an argument to be made. I would put it this way. Potholes suck. And a pothole on the road that you have to drive around is just a daily nightmare. But calling the police when you need them for something and them not showing up is way more serious an issue than the pothole. And so, not that we don't have to fill potholes, and not that that's not a responsibility that we have as a city, but we also have to understand in terms of priority, public safety is at the very highest levels of what we have to do as a city. And if that means that we have to punt or cut other things down the road and delay capital improvement projects until some future time when the revenue is sufficient to do that, because we need to make sure that, you know, they're sufficiently budgetarily supported, then we have to do that. What I think the decision has to be and the discussion has to be is, should that be done with a supplement from the general fund? Or should that be done through a HCC tax increase that keeps those fees in that decision? Either way, it still has to be paid for. right? I don't think.
Combination of both.
Yeah, or a combination of both or one or the other, but I don't think our public is going to be excited about saying, hey, we know there's traffic accidents and problems and we're already spread thin, but we think we can get by with only 2.5 officers a shift instead of 3.75. And we're just gonna see how that works. Good luck, everybody.
That's not-
Hope you don't have a bad
That's
day.
not what I'm saying at all. I hope nobody's taking.
I'm not saying that you are, I just don't,
What I'm saying is,
I don't want to go too far and have our officers ever consider the fact that we have anything less than a full commitment to support their safety and their successful operations.
And I think,
I agree 100%. My point with that is simply that I can't go to the taxpayers once, let alone multiple times, going back to what you said earlier, and say we need to increase the tax for public safety or whatever else, because we need more money. I need to have the answers. I need to have a comprehensive plan.
Absolutely.
I need to understand this is the model and how we're running it and explain why those increases are there.
but, I think we're all your, kind of kept quiet on this, I think all your concerns are for a discussion for, in my opinion, for next year, cause they're not adding, at this point now, the 396, we're not adding any people right now. This is fixing a budget issue that we have discovered, that we're short, we are short now, but this is not funding another level of, we're strictly maintaining at this point, you're covering inflationary costs with 396, you're covering the
No, we're covering the approved cost increases we already made to deal with inflation from before.
That's what I'm
Like,
saying, so we've got.
we're not even getting up to
So-
new inflation.
So I think
The
you're.
question is, do we do a tax increase to fill the hole, or do we pull it from the general fund and get
And that's what I'm saying, that's what I
and
think,
figure out the plan
That
this year?
that would be what I would tend to lean towards, is that we cover the 396 with the general fund.
This year, right.
Because they're, for this year, and then we really need to look at it and understanding all that, cause I've said, along with many others have said, I believe our job, first and foremost, is just critical services to our community, which is police, fire, water, and infrastructure type things, We do a lot of fun stuff in our city, and sometimes those things have to be cut, because you have to make sure the police shows up at the door, right? I think that there's A-level service and there's B-level service, and then you have to understand, if you drop to a B-level service, what does it really do to your community in the long run, and I don't know all that for sure, but I think Chief does.
But we're very cautious with saying A's and B's and C's,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, there's nothing less than an A-level service when there's a violent crime happening,
Exactly.
period. That's a non-negotiable, right, in the response by police. When you're talking about, and Councilor Henderson brings it up, that there's a traffic accident that's disturbing traffic, does it matter whether it's 10 or 20 minutes? Maybe, because it could involve somebody else getting harmed or hurt, and that's why we do that. If your car got broken into, yeah, that's probably something could happen. Now, the only caution I would say about that, and peak times to me are like this anvil that sit over our head, and as I look at the snow on the mountain, the snow fell, we know it's coming. How do we channel that water that's coming our way, right? And that's a little bit of the situation I feel like we're in, and we will continue to get into as I drive around the city and see the same things that you all see.
Yeah.
Now, all of that being said, I don't believe that your police department's anything but an A-level service when it comes to priority one or violent crime calls. We can get where we need to be, and we've proven that by our numbers, right? However, our peak times are going to compress on us, and that will be a problem for all of us sitting in this room as constituents get a hold of you and very, very mad clients get a hold of me because we didn't do something on their timeline. But some of it is to reprogram them, right? Not everything is going to have a cop on your door in a millisecond. But, when seconds count, you're hoping that cop's rolling down the road.
Yeah.
And
If you have
and to think about it, and I can certainly bring back to you guys a much more detailed program, and I know a lot of you have been around me.
8 minutes, chief.
Right?
8 minutes, chief.
But we have 4 districts and we have cops in those districts, and we could talk about stuff like cross dispatch, all of those things that are important, burden of central location and all of those things that we talk about when people go, oh, the cops are just out there doing their job. There's a lot of math that goes into how we get where we need to be quickly, just like the fire department, right? And by the way, the fire department is open at any time to fill potholes, so I think we can use them in that way.
They won't be done well.
I guess, Chief,
So-
the concern to me is that if we bump, I talked to you about this last
That's my
meeting,
concern.
is we bump the officers,
That's what
then do we start getting behind? Because for me, as a tax-paying resident, who also has to make decisions about tax issues, right? It's a lot easier for me to swallow a tax increase if I can demonstrate, somebody can demonstrate to me, here's how you get behind, here's how, this is the response levels, how they decrease, those types of things, to really have a eyes wide open look at, this is where we don't wanna go. Cause just like what you were just saying, when we talked about how many people live in these houses, that besides one family, those types of things, I think there's a vast majority of people who live in Harriman that kinda live in la land, that don't really realize the impact that the growth has had and will continue to have escalating on our crime factors here.
Well, and let me share, I think to your point, and I get, none of us want to do, it's not popular to raise taxes, it's not
Not
popular.
popular in my
But I think
household
we've all
to
sat
raise
in here
taxes.
today even and said at some point down the road, we wish somebody would have dealt with this stuff head on. Like, it's not a popular decision right now, but
Right.
if we move something out of general fund this year, we're just kicking the can down the road on everything we've talked about,
100%.
general fund, road repairs. Next year, are we gonna have to, because we've kicked the can down the year.
Hey, a third of that is my bathrooms at the cemetery. And
And I get that,
I
but
get
it's,
what you're saying, but what,
but let me, I've been quiet, none of us want to do it, I know it's a hard year to do it, it's an awful year to do it, none of us want to do this, but I wish council down the road back 5 years ago, whatever, 10 years ago, would have started a smaller increase. I'm afraid if we don't do somewhat of a small increase, we're gonna be forced into a major increase in a couple of years because we're not, like we talked about, there's no inflationary, especially for there's no inflationary coverage on, they have one source of income, it's that property tax. And if we don't, we can supplement it this year, we could, yes, but then next year, we further behind the general fund while also they're behind. So I think if we don't take some action this year, as hard as it's gonna be, we're gonna be in a year looking back and thinking, I wish we would have done something this year to cover some of the shortages, as unpopular as it's gonna be. I'm not,
Yeah.
For
I'm
what
just
it's
saying
worth,
devil's advocate.
what it's worth, I think it would be prudent for us to go ahead and announce and schedule the truth and taxation hearing if there's a deadline on that. Let's go ahead and get that out there so that there's a possibility for us to have that conversation if we determine it's necessary. If we say we've made a decision not to do it, it's easy to just pass, but you have to announce it within a time frame or you can't.
And most cities are doing that annually now
trapped,
anyways, whether they do it or not, so I think we need to start
It's a,
having
it's
that
a reasonable
conversation.
hedge, right, to have the conversation.
I have no problem with that, as long as there's not an expectation that we
Yeah.
will.
Yeah, I just think there needs to just be a little bit more documentation to help us really understand, are we really truly kicking the can? Or can we absorb that can kick?
And it
for
gives us the
for
time to
another year
make a
to
more
make-
educated decision on
Yeah.
what it should be and what the plan is.
And that's fine, I'm
longer
okay
term.
with that, but we are kicking. We've all sat in here and talked about how,
I personally disagree, because we've been subsidizing it, we've gone, and I wanna see that, all of the numbers added up. 396 is 396, just got done saying, we're going to need to look at part of the comprehensive plan using other sources than just the police tax to fund our police services.
Going forward.
There's no way that we'll ever be able to provide the level of service that we want just with that property tax, and it's not an effective way to
Okay,
fund
so-
the service.
So here's my question then. Just philosophically, one of the things we did as a city when we started both HCC and the fire service area was we thought it would be better to have a transparent allocation, say this is how much these services are costing in your city
that's where I'm at.
and have it there. If we're gonna supplement it with general fund, that isn't accurately reflecting what all the costs of that are.
So again,
And then we're just like every other city. Why do we have a separate taxing district? Just bring it all in and let's pay everything out of general funds, you know?
Yeah, unless what you're identifying is crossing guards, maybe
This-
you
that's
say
what I'm
this
saying.
is not a police responsibility, maybe crossing guards truly
There's
is a
some of
general
Okay,
fund
we
responsibility.
and I think we
Or
should,
something like that.
but we still have $100,000 shortage and 4 people that we're not hiring.
Okay,
That 4 people is another $500,000 at least, right? I
So-
mean, FTE and benefits and all that stuff, right? I mean, that's holy shit.
okay, so
Thank you, man.
let's separate those. Let's separate those,
I don't
right?
know, I'm just throwing.
So that's part of what I wanna understand of the growth model, right? Because that's ignoring that we're adding about $500,000 a year in new growth money, right? That needs to be used towards new growth, but to me, that goes towards a comprehensive plan of, we have money and metrics where we have the need to then deploy that money that's built in for those number of years. So, can't ignore the fact that we'll have money to hire people. And digging through some of this, what I'm kind of coming to the conclusion of is that to get to our base level of service as you've described, we kind of have hired people a little bit ahead of that growth, right? To get to
I
that.
don't think that's true. I think
To
the
get to
budgets
that-
have been behind, but I don't think we've been behind on people.
No, I don't.
No, not-
I-
that's
we haven't
what I
been
think
behind
too,
on-
right?
Ahead, that's what I mean,
I think you've had a modeling drive your hiring,
We've gotten to
not
the,
revenue.
we've gotten to the base level of people we need for the service, but it's run ahead of our actual collection of the revenue, right?
Fair.
So part of what I wanna do is hit pause, like, to me, it's okay, 396 from the general fund, now we've identified the problems, right? We've already identified a few solutions, we know we need to subsidize some this year, and we've identified some things that we should probably be paying for that shouldn't be coming from the budget, right? We have our base level of service, so now let's reset and talk about what this looks like from here on out. And instead of going to the taxpayers 3 times in a row for big increases that cover the holes and we still haven't done all of that work, now we have a comprehensive plan and I could say we plan on doing these tax increases, this year and then in 2 years from now, and 2 years from now, and 2 years from now. Because we have a plan in place that shows that.
And again, I get that, and I think that's where I say I think that's the conversation for next year, cause we're not asking for growth this year. We've got 2 pots that we're short on. We're just gonna rob Pete again, we're gonna go play the shell
We
game
need to
and move
absorb that new
396.
growth money to pay for what we've hired for our level of service this year.
I guess then the answer is the answer is gonna be one or the other, but we can make that decision in a future meeting when we see a little bit more numbers that satisfy some of your questions. And if at some point we go, well, we really have to do the truth in taxation, that opportunity remains open if we
Yeah.
decide that that's really where we
When
need to go.
to that point, I think we should notice it every year anyway.
Yeah.
For the reasons that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Kyle, can I just add that amount? We kind of talked about the amount. 396, what is that per average household
About $27 roughly.
a year?
Is that the 5%, the 6.5%?
That's the 5%.
Yeah, it's 5 something, or it's less than 5. I can't
Like
remember.
30 bucks
We
a
looked
year.
at, we looked at it this morning,
$27 a year
4.6.
to cover the 400,000.
Right.
the 396, yeah.
So what you're saying is, we don't really need much of a tax increase if we take the, crossing guards out.
Well, if you take the crossing guards out,
On your,
again, it's,
I'd like to look at.
it's a lower number, it's 100,000.
Then you're showing on the general.
But you're,
So it's $7 a month, or $7 a year.
general funds,
And,
right?
and having said all of that,
1.5% increase.
I'll go on record as saying, if we don't do a tax increase this year, I fully intend to next year. When I have all the information, we have a
Need it,
comprehensive plan, we will need to do it,
Yeah.
absolutely, but I want to make the most informed decision to do it, rather than a stopgap measure.
Could I just add real quick to the conversation, as I hear the modeling, which I think is important, and we have been modeling kind of in this weird vacuum where we didn't know exactly where our ends were and now we know. And we have been modeling without a lot of data since we left UPD as to what our real needs are. But I would caution everybody here that my models won't show based on revenue. I don't sit down and say I have this much money, which we have in the past, because we didn't know. This is what I'm gonna build. The reality in law enforcement is we model to our need, and I kinda come to you guys and say, this is what it's gonna cost. And I hate to put it that way, but that's
That's
how
what I want, that's what I
That's,
want you
yeah,
to
that's
do.
exactly what we need,
Right.
exactly.
So we don't, we don't look down and say, well, I've got $4 million and how can I model that? It has nothing to do with it in my mind. It absolutely has to do with the service, the types of calls. The metrics are long and really, really boring, worse than law school, but I'll bring it to you.
It's gotta
and
be
we'll
real boring.
It is.
I just think, Chief,
all
that
about it. So
that providing the data is one thing. I think in terms of what we would like to hear from you is a really high-end summary of those things, saying, this is the way we model, this is what it is how many per shift, this is, and just share that so that when the public comes in and say, look, here's our model, this is what we've got, this is why we do it this way, that's gonna result in a $27 a year increase. I think people will, I don't think that the people of Harriman are gonna say, look, I'm not gonna pay $3 a month more
Yeah.
so that I can make sure somebody come to my house when I call them.
Yeah, I
I think they're okay with that, right?
at 42 Sworn, we do some pretty awesome things. You all saw the trainings we put on. We do DARE, which, by the way, I got publicly booted when I brought up the idea of doing something different. Bad idea. DARE is a big thing,
They're
but it's an
used to it.
expensive thing,
They're used
right?
to it.
And they're used to it.
Other cities
So-
don't have
And
program like that.
and the public feedback from before and after is just incredible, night and day, right? Our people appreciate you, as do all of us appreciate the job that's being done there. The question is just how do we crunch the numbers enough to make sure that it stays reasonable year after year so that it doesn't go,
Exactly.
oh, this year you're gonna get a $500 tax increase, you know, I mean, those
Cause,
kind
yeah,
of
cause I
things
don't
we
wanna
have to
tell them
understand.
what's only $27 this year. But the inflation cost of that 5 years from now is now we have to do another one for $50 and
Yeah.
another one.
Well, let me play devil's advocate to that. We all talk about the school district right now. They get pretty bashed because they have go back and watch some of their board meetings from a few years ago. They had talked about small ones for a few years. They didn't, they pushed it off and then they had this massive one, massive. Again, I get what you're saying.
They shouldn't build such big schools.
Well, okay, I don't wanna get into, but what do we do if we don't do it this year? And we come next year and all the models show we should have done it, we need to do a 10% one next year. If I'm a resident, I'm saying I wish you would have done a small one last year and a small one this year. As a resident, I'm saying that, rather than a big one, cause that's what all the school district, that's all their feedback in that. When I went to their public hearing, it was, I wish you would have done some small ones, rather than,
I would
A
totally
massive
agree with
one.
that approach, as long as what we talked about is that the increases we're proposing and we're forecasting are in line with the model.
They're needed.
That they're
Comprehensive
justified,
plan.
they're reasonable, that we know this is what's happening, where we have a careful consideration of our model. We've evaluated what the actual costs of officers are now because of, the market that we're in, inflationary pressures,
We've
we've
accounted for the
accounted for all
growth,
that,
we've
this is what
accounted
it's gonna
for
cost.
demand, and here's the cost of our
'Cause-
projected increases, that's.
Because it's a different decision than what street we resurface this year versus next year, right? That's a different decision, it's non-negotiable, right?
And it's, the difference with the school district is they didn't do any of this, in my opinion.
Yeah, they sh-
They didn't do this
absolutely
kind of
did not.
comprehensive plan,
And I
they
said
didn't
that
have this
earlier.
kind of discussion. It was just, we just needed to raise taxes so people are used to raising taxes. We have more money. When I go to schools, go into faculty, so I work a lot with schools and meet with people in the classrooms and faculty room. I go into faculty room, it's like a freaking amusement park in there. I talk to teachers and like, well, the principal says we have $5,000 at the end of the year to spend, so we spend it on stuff, ice cream machines and stuff, right? Totally different, I understand what you're saying,
You guys have an ice cream machine now?
but totally.
We do.
I've been
Teachers
trying to
and the
get
fire
used to
guys
get
do.
one.
Espresso or something.
If
We
the-
go over there.
To me,
they'll
right.
know.
What I'm saying, Lauren, is that in budgeting in general for government, if the money's there, it gets spent, it's a use it or lose it mentality. We've got great people, we've uncovered what's been done poorly in the past and what we need to do for it. If we're gonna raise taxes, I'd like to do it in the most informed way possible with a plan that I can tell people, here's our plan. And it's not, and what I'm gonna tell them is, and I'll tell all of you, it's not gonna be one tax increase this year, and then we'll debate it again in 5 years. It needs to be a plan of, it's gonna be a tax increase next year, and probably another one in 2 or 3 years, and we have a distinct model, we know our growth pattern, we know what the numbers are. Here's the plan for that. Expect it, and we have that notice every single year where we tell people, this is the plan, we revise the numbers, and it's in place. I don't want to do a tax increase, tell them that we need it for those reasons, but we don't have all the answers. It's a stopgap measure And then we try to figure it all out and have to go back to them again and say, okay, well, just kidding, now here's the real plan.
Right, and I think, Sherry, you made an important point earlier, is, you know, you talked about, well, look, if there's certain things that we have to do without, sometimes we have to do without. But in the reality of the situation, I mean, you could cut Nine Lights, Harriman Howell,
Yeah.
PJ's, also, it's like $87,000. I
Right.
mean, that's
Maybe
half of an officer's cost, you know?
I would say that does not include our staff time or any overtime, that's just
Sure,
what's
but what I'm
in
saying
the-
is it doesn't,
No.
it's not a massive needle mover to cancel 20 events,
I-
doesn't really do very much,
I
right?
think the city
I'm not
doesn't have a lot of expense.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of
I think we don't, we have some, but we don't really have enough to really offset the needs in the police department for sure.
Right, like, why are
It
they
never
wasting
will.
money on fireworks?
For long
Great, we wanna have
Well, we
fireworks
might
that'll
at
cover the
some point,
ammo
depends on how much
for a
economic
month, you know,
development
it's like, it
But yeah.
doesn't do anything, right? It's like, it's. I'm really comfortable going to our taxpayers saying that we don't have a fluffy budget. It's not packed with wasteful spending, it's not extraordinary, but the structural issues we have in our budget aren't because of overspending. It's not because of, you know, bad policies and bad decision-making, it's because of, what was it, quote?
I use the term sloppy accounting, but
No, you said another, or more artful way to say it, wasn't accounted for correctly, right? That was the phrase.
Fluffy kind of.
Because things that weren't
Budgeting
accounted for
correctly.
correctly, and now those accounting errors, frankly, pretty substantial ones, the compound effect of that across 4 or 5 different funds, it's a big problem. And that's why I'm glad we're having a conversation about the police separate from these other discussions, is it's a different decision.
Yeah, I said that before, I said, I can feel comfortable going to the taxpayers and saying, we need a tax increase if it means that our police stays viable and can respond when they need to and up to the level of service that we've now come to expect, right?
And we've done the hard work to make sure that this is why it's needed.
Yeah, exactly, because we've vetted through, and I 100% trust our police chief that he's vetted through this. Now all I need to do is just have that document in front of me that can show me, so I can show the taxpayer and myself, because I too am a taxpayer, that this is why it's needed. And I just don't think you get a lot of pushback on that, because it's easily demonstrated.
And this might be oversimplifying things, but I'm gonna attempt to, right? When I look at our budget, and what's been explained to us has happened, we have a 2-year budget. Money's there for services, we're finding out that there's been some sloppy accounting, or wasn't accounted for correctly. So, we try and put this in like human terms. My wife's gonna kill me for saying this, cause she doesn't do this, we actually have separate credit cards, but it'd be like if my wife said, oh, I forgot that I put that trip to going to North Carolina for a soccer tournament in the national playoffs. I forgot to tell you, I put that on the credit card, it's a couple $1,000s. Well, it wasn't in my budget, I hadn't accounted for that. I've got to then look ahead for the rest of the year and figure out what I'm gonna do without to pay for that. And that's kinda how I look at this, is that we have the budget, we didn't account for things that we thought we did. So now we need to look through the rest of the budget for this coming year and say, what can we do without to make up for that? And then I can make a plan for next year, because we should qualify for that again, for the national playoffs again, and I need to plan for that $2,000 this next year. Does that make?
And-
That's.
And Jared, I would say the one thing is that, I think I'm very comfortable saying, I'm okay punting capital improvement projects of certain kinds for a while.
As long as
Even
you're
if we
not-
said, hey, look, we're not gonna.
We're used to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what we've been doing forever, right? But if you said, okay, other than these, 4 or 5 urgent things that have to be done, we're gonna take all capital improvement projects and move everything out 18 or 24 months and start over. And then that's where it goes. So you have a window here where there's money that's not going at capital improvement, we fix
assess
holes, we
things
right
and
size, we get stuff out. And then we approach things with a reasonable plan and saying, okay, starting in 2025 budget year, we can start doing capital improvement because now we have a 10-year plan, it's all built out, all the modeling's in, we have better revenue controls, we have, things accounted for correctly now, we know our proper allocations, we have the people, and you can go forward and build reliable budget models going forward, right? I think it's just doing this on the fly and trying to juggle this and that and the other, it's creating some, I don't know about everybody else, it creates some stress for me to try and figure out what are we gonna do. I think it's just a lot easier to go, I don't have any great heartburn over saying, if we have to fix something without making a massive tax increase, I think we just fix it and we push off some of the capital improvement projects for, not permanently, but we just delay everything for a while.
Well, it goes back to really what you said earlier too, is we can increase taxes to pay for it. But if you look at your own individual budget, it's like, oh, we have a shortfall, or maybe have to cut back, or we're not gonna be able to go on that vacation this year, or go this or that, because we gotta cover the mistake that was made, or
Right.
the error in accounting. Or we can just tax ourselves even more, and we're gonna still have to pay that back, and now our check's is gonna be short because we're having to pay back the tax, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not coming from nowhere. It's, when you say tax, it's coming from this person who's already
And people have kind of reached the limit on it.
strapped. And so I would, if it was my own budget, I would prefer to scale back and say I have to tap the brakes on the fun things I wanted to do, or the capital improvement projects I wanted to do for the next year or two, to try and make up the shortfall, rather than just adding more debt to myself by a tax, is really what it is.
Not to belabor it, I don't wanna put words in anyone's mouth, but we have a lot of new people in these chairs, right, who for the last couple years have been trying to figure all of this out and are chasing it. Right, so the way you put it, I think, is perfect of, can we press pause? And by pressing pause, it's doing without some of those things too.
You have to
My-
call
my
the
rest,
neighbors
my
and say that
cemetery
road's not
bathrooms get
coming
pushed
again.
off again, and I have to watch old ladies, walking across the street and asking somebody to use their restroom, sort of thing, but some of those things can be pushed off, but we have a good team in place now that's identified these things. If we can push pause and get a good plan in place, I'd feel much better about then saying, okay, we do need to increase police, the tax for police, increase the fee for water, because we've assessed everything, we've fixed the problems and have a plan going forward. I can feel good about going, this is gonna cost you this much more, because now we have our arms around it. I don't feel good about telling them, we're gonna charge you some more to, as a stop,
have some holes and we
as
think-
a
yeah.
stopgap.
Right.
And we'll figure it out later and probably come back and ask you for more.
Completely agree.
So what I heard, do the notice for the, truth in taxation, do a bunch, we can craft all the numbers and you can make a decision at that time. But in the meantime, figure out in the general fund. Can tell you fairly quickly what that does. In our current, so in 2024, so in 2023, we have about 187,000 scheduled for that cemetery bathroom. I'd probably hold that. We'll just go into the,
Sorry, how much?
we had what, two something, and
Inflation, man,
we've spent a certain
it was like
amount.
100,000 when I brought this up
It's
6 years ago.
If we built it stick built, it's 350, 500,000, so we
Yeah.
figured it would be cheaper to build a townhome and let people borrow it out. I don't know why these things cost so much, it's just this building, it's
Well,
like.
and that's
really?
another reason to push it off, cause I think personally, I think some of these costs will go down when the economy resets, but.
So that's just kind of some immediate, we'll look at some of those and bring back. There's in the current money that was scheduled to be moved out of to the capital fund from the general fund. We have 173,000, which is for the Harriman Rose extension. That's actually a CDA project. It's actually more than that, but we'll take that won't be in the general fund. That was I don't know how that got. Scrap that one. So there's your 173. We actually, if we move everything out, so what we'll commit to do in the plan is bring back for 2025 what we think fits, and then let you push things around as
Just
you want.
those two projects is 350.
Correct. I think I've identified in there, if we slide, we're already moving down the road for 7,300. I think we're entering a good bidding time, so I would like to still do that project. That's almost 3 million is what we budgeted. We're a million short, or 1.3 million, 1.4 short. Most of it's in that capital. But I would still like to do that project because we've already started some of the property acquisition. We're using a different right-of-way agent this time. Try a different one. So we're moving there, but I think if we pull some of these other things, we have several pieces hanging out there that we talked about earlier about the surprises, these reimbursement agreements. So 6,400 west, at some point, the piece behind that we obligated ourselves to in the city, or Creek Ridge, since Creek Ridge, MDA,
Is
That's
this
gonna
from
get
Is
built.
this from 126 to 118, that stretch?
Yeah, that stretch there. That's going to come. Right now, it's in there for 244,000 because they were gonna pay it over several years. I don't know that we're gonna get to do it that way. So I would probably back that out and we'll have to see. That's general fund. I don't know if they pay with the PID and we pay them back. We'll have to negotiate some of that. 118th South Improvements was another CDA or another reimbursement agreement that was signed. It's just about 1.2 million in 2025. Some of these have to stay, but I think there's some others we can do without. 6,000 West, we've been doing some work, but it was intended to go after 7,300, so we're not as far advanced. I'd probably slide that one. What I need to be able to do with that direction, I think we can cover the 1.4 this year without, or in 2024. When we bring back that capital plan, we'll have better numbers to build off of and then allow, I'm thinking we probably need to do that in like October, so I'm looking at Justin since Justin somehow became the CIP guru. So he's in, so we're gonna work with him and his staff.
Someone else wanted it.
You're good at it.
I think maybe he was gone that meeting, I don't know what happened,
That's
but,
right, not it.
Yeah, Justin isn't here.
we'll bring that back
He took
earlier.
ownership.
We need that data to build the budget. So there's a bit of a feedback loop that has to happen, but we'll work on that so we can then prioritize in those out years. And then start working the plan. So I will say this first year, I used it off I think we thought we had like 6 million a year we could put on capital. So, all right, let's do that. That's probably too aggressive. If we had sales tax increases of 15% a year for the next 10 years, that'd work, but that's not realistic. So that's our commitment to you. I think even within our budget, we tend not to spend everything. So I think I've already canceled Christmas in June. We'll just keep it that way. I've told people that there was a philosophy at one point, if we have it, let's go spend it. I just want, if we need it and if you can fit all the metrics, then let's figure out how to do it. But if it's just to spend it because I won't get it next year, we're shifting the mentality of a cost plus budget, this is what I spent this year, I should get that plus, to, we need to move to that
We
priority.
look back and we see that you wasted it. You get bigger.
I've sat there throughout my career, I sit at the end of the year thinking, what are we buying? Why did you buy this? What are we buying this? Well, I had money. So it's, and I would say, when we had that conversation, it was a good conversation, some people have been trained, hey, we gotta spend it. So, we're working, I've had people come, okay, I've been saving to do this, we were gonna buy this tractor.
Like the tractor.
We're gonna buy this tractor. Turns out the salesman gave us the wrong size, we actually need this one, but I've been saving through the year in these areas so we can actually still do that acquisition. We said, okay, that makes sense, we're trying to live within the budget. But even then, most of these departments are not gonna spend 100%.
I'm looking, and right now, most of them are 60%.
Other thing too,
With a month to go.
50 to 60,
Well,
well,
you got
Really
credit cards.
really major,
Really
yeah,
2 months, cause it takes a month for us to
Yeah.
get the invoice and then,
Other
But
thing
still,
too-
that's a
Still, that's
reasonable
pretty good.
expectation of not being for everybody gonna be at a
and a
I
lot
think
of the
we'll be good.
overages are things like fuel,
Right.
right? Or things that the managers didn't have the authority to budget for, like overtime.
Expo markers.
so other
Snow
thing too
removal.
though
Yeah,
is that,
snow removal's
I'm not
a big one.
suggesting we count our chickens before we hatch, but we also have some pretty promising commercial developments coming that are gonna increase our sales tax, so that'll start to ease a little bit of some of the burden we have between the costs that we have.
Yeah, but it's gonna be 2027,
Oh,
2028,
no, I'm not suggesting it's
2030
today,
when
but I'm
some of
just
that
saying,
stuff
I'm
starts
just saying
coming
as
in.
we project forward, I don't
That's what I'm
think that
saying,
we
that
have to
needs to be
go.
part of the plan.
Yeah, it's part of the plan that some of this will shift off of that too, to where we just took out the chunk of money that we were dependent on, this crack that we've been addicted to, but we'll be able to start replacing that as we develop out some of our commercial stuff too.
That's an excellent point. The nice thing
Yeah.
about the commercial users is that they do pay a higher ratio of property tax.
Yeah, the chief,
And so we've talked about balance, that's one of the key parts of a balanced land use is that you have others, not just your homeowners.
Yeah.
Councilor Henderson and I went through a whole philosophy. I struggle a little bit with property tax just from a schooling and learning about it because homes don't generate income. Traditionally, when they started property tax, you were dealing with large landowners who
Yeah.
were generating money off their income. So that said, nobody's ever asked me my opinion on how to fix it, and I don't think they ever will, so I just keep it to myself. Certainly, but we can come back with something. I feel like we've got enough direction, and being able to work with the chief to come up with a model and some, I think, key metrics and triggers so that we're watching what's happening. And I think that, as we described it, that will be important. Having been in cities where you're behind, you have violent crime, you have a lot of drugs. When you get to that point, it's easy to show your metric. I'd rather not, but the one thing it's hard, you cannot measure is crime prevented.
yeah.
You know, there's no way for the officers to come in, I prevented 4 crimes today, chief to do that, cause I can't prove
But you
it
know
anyway,
that they
so.
do.
Right, and so that's the thing.
Shaver
That's why
Scowl probably does.
and ours is different, so we'll come up with some things, like I said, we've talked about our, it's somewhat unique in how we are right now as a city, and someday we will mature up and we'll be like the others, right? We'll have other challenges that we don't see today, same in water, because our utility will age and we'll have to deal with
Yeah.
that, so we will do the hearing, we'll take care of some of those things, you're gonna be talking about the water, getting some of that philosophy so we can then set something going forward. We'll start working on the CIP, trying to bring it in so that you can then have real numbers to work on, and we'll get that stuff for PD, I think that's.
That's, most of our stuff's modeled, but
Yeah.
that's not a.
Yeah, for sure.
We got it.
And I'll just echo what I think the sentiment has been, make sure that it's loud and clear to the police department, that I think everyone here at this table is very supportive. 1,000 times grateful that we made the change, and now we just have to figure out some of the
So
nuances.
then I'll say it
that
forever,
take
no matter what happens from here on out.
the best.
Best thing I was involved in
Yeah,
was that
me
change.
too.
We did a
Me
good job,
too.
and we got great cops out of it.
Yeah, and continue to have great officers.
Well, and that, I mean, along those lines, hopefully, anything that I've said or anyone else hasn't been misconstrued negatively that way. Like, we have, in my mind, the best police department there is. I mean, not a single open allocation, I said that last time, that says something about the job
that
that
prevents
everyone's
crime.
doing. It absolutely does, and we wanna make sure that what we're doing is sustainable, like that, at least for me, that's my mission. I don't wanna get to a point where if we're so far out over our skis and we can't sustain it, and then we have other problems. I wanna make sure that we're being diligent about the decision making. So, like I said, I'll go on record saying if we don't do a tax increase this year and we do kind of a holding pattern to get the plan in place, I fully expect us to have those increases going forward.
If I can just say one thing, I don't wanna ruin the kumbaya moment here. And this isn't necessarily directed at
As long as it's not
police or
me.
anybody. When I ran for office, one of the questions I got asked in my Meet the Candidates meeting was, how do you feel about tax increases? I said, I hate tax increases. I don't wanna pay taxes. I don't want anybody else to have to pay more taxes. And I said, but, you know, I know sometimes they're necessary, but I made a promise I wouldn't support any tax increases without making sure that every other alternative was first explored, right?
Absolutely.
And that's I think that's really the only level of accountability, is that we've done everything else that we can do. So in our last meeting, we said nothing's off the table. You know, there's nothing that we're not willing to look at as an opportunity. I think all of us have to understand everything that we do is being paid for out of taxpayers' pockets. And I think we should expect of ourselves and of our city and everything that we do to return for that investment the best value that we can. That those dollars are being used wisely, that we are stretching them, that we're being efficient, we're being careful, that we are trying to find ways to save and preserve and utilize those sacred funds in the best possible ways. And so I don't wanna say that, okay, we've generalized some decisions about, you know, we're gonna move some stuff to general fund and blah, blah, blah. That doesn't necessarily mean that leaves us off the hook to not be looking at across the board to find ways that we can be better.
Oh, yeah.
And use taxpayer funds better. And so I would just encourage everybody, department heads, people, look for ways to save money. If they're reasonable things, there's things we should do, even if it, you know, like we talked about the sound equipment, right? You bought the sound equipment so we could save money over time. That makes a sense deal. If there's things like that people can see over time, look, if we're not gonna do capital improvement, we may need to buy another pothole machine, okay, you know? It's $150,000, but it lets us delay, you know, expenses for 3 years, okay, maybe we gotta do something like that. I'm just joking, but.
Maybe not.
But what I mean is that
There's a lot of work yet to be done.
there's still work that can be done and I think that we should be doing.
Yep.
And so I just don't wanna say, okay, it's all done, we dodged a bullet from council, no, cause I still think we need to do better.
I think, at least for me, the general direction we've given should be marching orders to do just that.
Anything else on
No,
budget?
and actually, that was very helpful, so we'll be coming back and discussing, we'll bring back the CIP really in the general fund to help you figure that out, how you wanna do it.
Okay. For the motion to go to close then.
52-4-205.
I'll read that whole thing.
Motion to temporarily recess city council meeting the following members of staff. City manager, assistant city manager, city attorney, city recorder, finance director, assistant city attorney, community development director, planning director, and communications manager. And police chief. And anybody else that should be here that we may not have called out in name. To convene in closed session, you know, Mr. Rogers. To convene in closed session in the Fort Harriman Conference Room for the purpose to discuss pending or reasonable imminent litigation and the purchase, exchange, or lease of real properties provided by Utah Code annotated section 52-4-205.
Second.
Mr.
Second. Motion by Steve, second by Secretary.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Jared.
Yeah.
I don't know, yes. We've been closed. Thank you, everybody. Check. I need to use a